Chapter 337 Rescued from the Sword of Islam, Part 3. The hearing to decide the validity of the marriage between Sheikh Ahmed and his child wife was conducted shortly after Ifat was taken away from her husband. The Sharia court wanted to render a decision on this sensitive issue before the wrath of the public became uncontrollable. The fatwa of Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi had created serious problems for the royal family and the judicial system in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. People openly protested and demanded the immediate release of the wife to the custody of her Saudi husband and the freedom to take her to any country and bed her. After issuing the fatwa, Iran invited the Saudi husband to bring his Indian wife to Tehran and live. Sudan also promised to welcome the married couple on its soil. The CIA team members were allowed to attend the trial with a translator. The trial was supposed to be conducted in Arabic. There are no lawyers in an Arabic Sharia court. Islamic law would not permit any lawyer because in the day of Prophet Muhammad there were no lawyers. The court, however, in the interest of justice, would allow the accused to call witnesses and produce evidence for his defense. These courts also used religious judges and assistant judges. In short, Sheikh Ahmed was allowed to present his case. Ifat was brought to the court too. She was kept in the women's jail until the court would decide on her status. It was widely predicted that should the court nullify her marriage to the old Saudi man, she would be deported and handed over to the Indian consulate to be shipped her back to her home country. If, however, the court ruled in the favor of Sheikh Ahmed, she would be returned to his custody. It was presumed that the court would then give him a week to make preparations to send her to another Muslim country. The righteous judges and the honorable audience began the old man his story. When my Indian maidservant was arrested by the Jeddah police for practicing public deception and adultery, I was left with two choices regarding her daughter. I should either send her back to her country to her relatives or keep her under my care until the Sharia court would issue its ruling on her mother. I preferred to keep her in my house until the court decided on the charges against her mother. After the court condemned her mother and sentenced her to be stoned to death for marrying two men at the same time and being impregnated by a third, Sheikh Ahmed paused when he heard murmuring and the shuffling of feet in court. Instead of continuing his sentence, he suddenly remembered the day he met her mother in India and decided to share his experience with the court and the audience. I did not know that her mother was a prostitute in Bombay and was cheating men and marrying them and stealing their money until the Sharia court convicted her. This was the way the old Saudi man falsified the story of his former Layla and told it to the court. I was performing my Friday public prayer in the renowned Muslim mosque at Haji Ali in Bombay when someone approached me and talked to me about her mother. He was a Muslim Indian. He told me that there was an Indian Muslim young woman who lost her husband recently and had a small daughter. He said that she was so poor and had no one to support her and her daughter. When she became widow, she started to work in the rich Hindus' houses. Because she was young and beautiful Muslim woman, the Hindu men harassed her sexually and some of them attempted to rape her. For that reason, she stopped going to their houses because she was chaste and good Muslim woman. I asked him what I could do to help such poor and helpless Muslim woman. He said to me, you were the only person who could solve her problem. I said to him, only Allah could solve the problems of poor people. If you want me to give her some money, I am ready to do so. He said to me, whatever you give her was going to finish one day. If you could help her to find a decent work to do, her problem would be solved forever. I said to him how I could give her a decent job when I am a foreigner in this country. Then, he said to me, take her with you to your country and make her your maidservant. Although, at that time I had 4 wives and 4 maidservants, still I agreed to help a widowed Muslim woman. I promised the Indian Muslim man who brought her to me and shared with me her problem that as soon as I return to my country I will send 2 visas and 2 tickets to the widow and her daughter. I did not want to separate a 7-year-old daughter from her mother. Sheikh Ahmed took out of his suitcase the copies of the visas and tickets of Rayhana and her daughter and lifted them up and showed them to the judges and audience. Then, he continued his story. I swear by Allah and the divorce of all my wives that I had never given any Indian man or woman before or after a free visa and purchased his or her ticket except for that Indian maidservant and her daughter. And I challenge the court and anyone present here to tell me about any Indian travel agency that issued free visas and tickets to any poor Indian family before or after as I did. Sheikh Ahmed paused when heard the audience began to clap their hands in appreciation of his generosity and kindness. He continued to narrate his false story. I did that because I am a father and I am a Muslim. I did that because I did not want a young Muslim woman to bring up her daughter through selling her thighs to the filthy Hindu infidels. The audience clapped their hands again and some of them shouted 3 times, Allahu Akbar. When the roar ceased, the old man continued his false story. When that young Indian Muslim widow came to Saudi Arabia, I decided to help her more than she expected. I understood that she was young and beautiful. At that time, I had 17 and 18 years old sons in my 4th wife's house. I scared that my young and unmarried sons might be tempted by the beauty of the young Indian maidservant and do harem with her. Therefore, when she came to my house, I convinced my Pakistani chauffeur to marry her. I did not want her to feel that I was forcing her to marry my driver. I shared with her what I had in my heart and she gladly agreed to marry my Pakistani chauffeur. The old Saudi paused and expecting cheering from the audience, but he got disappointed when no one clapped. He resumed his tale, whatever I had done to the mother of my Indian wife, I did it with good intentions. I wanted to have a clear conscience. I did not want to stand before Allah at the Day of Judgment and tell him that I left a poor Muslim widow to starve in Bombay and sell her body to feed her daughter. This time, some of the audience stood on their feet and shouted praises to their Allah and thanked Sheikh Ahmed. As soon as the crowd stopped shouting and praising him, the old man put his right hand on his chest and lifted up his left hand and said loudly, as soon as my Indian maidservant got married to my chauffeur, Allah had exposed her. I did not know that she was a prostitute in Bombay and the man who brought her to me had cheated me. He might be the man who impregnated her. When the police found out that she married 2 men in Jeddah at the same time, she was arrested. Imagine a single woman marrying 2 men at the same time and sleeping with them, and she did that in less than 10 days. I had never heard about such an abomination being done by a Muslim woman in all my life. Sheikh Ahmed paused when he heard the judges and the audience cursing the devil and asking Allah to protect their daughters, sisters, and wives from such an abomination. The police discovered that she had been impregnated by a 3rd man before she married those 2 men. When I went to the police and inquired about her, I was told that she is a professional prostitute who goes around the city and cheats men, marries them and steals their money. Sheikh Ahmed once again paused expecting some reaction from the court or the audience, but when no one uttered a word or moved a leg, he continued his fabricated story. I could not refute the police when they showed me the copies of her 2 marriages and the result of the pregnancy test. It appeared that she was already impregnated by someone before she left India. Either she had a husband and lied to me and said that he died, or she slept with another man and became pregnant. Only Allah knows how she got impregnated. Anyway, I kept her daughter in my house and waited until the Sharia court convicted her with those serious crimes of marrying 2 men at the same time and getting impregnated by a 3rd man without a husband. The court of Allah and His Messenger sentenced her to be stoned to death. When I came to know that the mother was going to be punished according to our blessed Sharia and she wasn't coming back, I was faced with the responsibility of her small daughter. At first, I decided to adopt her daughter, but then I remembered that our gracious Quran forbids adoption. Wherefore, I decided to send her back to India. I contacted the address that was mentioned in the daughter's passport and her mother's passport. I discovered that it was a fake address. The people who were living in that address were foreign students from Jordan and Palestine studying at Bombay University. I talked to them personally on the phone and I learned that they had been living in that apartment for more than 3 years. Here are copies of the passport of my Indian wife and her mother's passport, and if anyone doubts my claim, let him contact the address and prove me wrong. Nonetheless, I decided to send my Indian maidservant's daughter along with my Pakistani chauffeur to Bombay. I thought he might find her family at Bombay and hand her over to them. Unfortunately, the Indian consulate rejected the application of my chauffeur for a visiting visa because he is a Pakistani. Indians think every Pakistani is a terrorist and their enemy. Here is a copy of my Pakistani chauffeur's passport and here is the rejection stamp of the Indian consulate. The court can have this copy and verify my claim. Then, I talked to the employees of the Indian consulate and begged them to help me to find the family of the small girl of my condemned Indian maidservant. None of them was prepared to help me. After all the doors were closed on my face, I decided to share the problem of the small Indian girl with my wives and children. I did not want to take an action that might create problem for the poor little girl and make my face ugly before my Allah and the people around me. One of my wives told me to keep the girl with her as her maidservant. I said to her, first of all, the girl is too small to be employed as a maidservant. Secondly, I said to her, if I allow the girl to stay with you, how you are going to protect her from your grown-up 2 sons? She has one son 17 and one 18 years old. Of course, the small girl is going to grow up one day and she might tempt my 2 good sons and cause them to fall into the sin of fornication. Therefore, I rejected the advice of my 4th wife. It was my first wife who gave me the right counsel. She said to me, either tell one of your sons to marry the poor Indian girl or marry her yourself. I said to her how my sons could marry her when the Saudi law forbade a Saudi man to marry a foreigner. Then, she said to me, marry her yourself and keep her in another country. At first, I rejected the advice. However, when I remembered that I travel often to some Asian and African Muslim countries for my business, I accepted the advice of my first wife. At that time, I had 4 wives in my ropes and the Sharia would not allow me to have a 5th one. I could just treat her as my right hand possessed and keep her as my Jaria. But, I scared that people might blame me and accuse me of cohabiting with a young woman without marriage. I shared my problem with my 4 wives again. I did not want to divorce one of them and marry the small girl. My first wife, who advised me to marry the small girl, volunteered herself. At that time, she was too old and dying with cancer. By the way, although my wife was sick for 2 years and I could not able to sleep with her, still I kept her under my ropes. She said to me exactly what the blessed wife of our gracious Prophet Muhammad, Sauda bint Zama'ah, had said to him concerning her age. Sauda donated her night to Aisha because she became too old and could not enjoy sex anymore. She gifted her night to the beloved and young child bride of our Prophet, Aisha bint Abu Bakr. Likewise, my first wife, Raqiya bint Salah, gifted her night and her marriage to the young Indian girl, Ifat Khan. I listened to her wise counsel and divorced her. After 2 days, my blessed first wife died and went to her Lord. The truth was that the first wife went into coma when she heard her wicked husband divorced her while she was on her deathbed. She did not come out of that coma and on the following day, she passed away. Sheikh Ahmed waited for appreciation from the court, but no one seemed to have believed his last lie. After I received the right counsel from my first wife and I divorced her, I began to work on the next step. I understood that the law of my country would not allow me to marry the small Indian girl, therefore, I decided to follow the wise advice of my first wife. I knew that our blessed Sharia did not forbid a Saudi man to marry non-Saudi woman. Hence, I decided to take the poor and orphaned Indian girl to a Muslim country that allowed Muslim men and women to get married to each other regardless of their color, race, and age. And Sheikh Ahmed was compelled to stop his false narration for a while when the audience clapped their hands. The 5 religious judges were observed to not clapping their hands, presumably because the old man hit a sensitive nerve regarding a law created by the royal family. I came to know that countries like Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, Indonesia, Somalia, Sudan, and Eritrea will allow a Muslim man to marry a Muslim woman regardless of her age, race, and color. The old man once again paused for effect, but none was forthcoming. All those blessed 7 Muslim countries were applying the Sharia of Allah and His gracious Prophet to its fullness. This time, his words were interrupted by the audience's clapping even though he did not expect an appreciation. Moreover, this time one of the 5 judges took a calculated risk and hit his table lightly with his hands. The old man felt that his words had achieved good effect on one of his judges, and that was a good sign. I decided to take my soon-to-be bride to one of those Muslim countries and marry her. I did not want to be selfish and decide for my future bride which country she should live in. For that reason, I wrote each country in a piece of paper and folded the papers and asked her to pick up one. She picked up the paper that had Eritrea. I had never been to Eritrea before, and I would have never gone there if she did not choose that country. It wasn't because I did not like to visit a Muslim land, but because of the language barrier. Since I promised my Allah and my gracious Prophet that whatever country my fiancé would choose I would take her there and marry her, I accepted her choice. I did not travel with her in the same plane because she wasn't my wife yet. I determined not to stay with her in the same hotel room because that was against our beautiful Sharia. I decided to keep the commandment of our gracious Prophet, which said that when a man and a woman are isolated in the presence of each, Satan is bound to be their third companion. I booked her in one plane and I booked myself in a different plane. When we reached Asmara, for the first time, since the old man began to tell his bogus story, one of the judges was forced to interrupt him and demand some explanation. How did an 8-year-old girl was allowed by the airlines to travel alone? As far as my knowledge is concerned, no airline would allow a minor to travel from one country to another without an adult accompanying her. Sheikh Ahmed knew about that technical problem, but he thought no one would notice it. He did not want to contradict himself that he allowed a man to travel with a girl she wasn't his wife. He did not want to introduce his Pakistani pimp at this stage of his made-up story. The clever judge put him on the hot seat and he had to give an explanation before his fake story would be accepted. Thank you, my blessed judge, for reminding me of something very important which I forgot to mention. As you all know that our blessed Sharia would not permit a virgin woman to marry a man without a wali, guardian. The judge who asked the question and the other 4 judges felt they were exposed when the old man reminded them of a very important question that they failed to ask from the beginning. I have forgotten to mention that I needed a wali in order to marry lawfully the virgin Indian girl. One of the judges thought to ask him, how did you know she was a virgin before marrying her? Even so, he ignored his thought when he remembered that the girl in question was 8 years old at that time. Since the Indian girl had no relative to be her wali, I decided to appoint to her a righteous Muslim man to be her guardian wali. I would not go to the prison and ask the permission of her mother because our blessed Sharia said, a woman is utterly incompetent to enter into a marriage contract either herself or for another, even though her guardian should authorize her to do so. A father can contract the marriage of his virgin daughter without asking her consent, whatever her age. Also, I did not know any male relative for the little girl so that I could ask his permission before I would contract her. I was about to drop the idea of marrying her when I discovered that I could not lawfully marry her without a male relative. I was in a dilemma. If I had to marry her without a wali, my marriage contract to her might be invalid and I would be committing adultery with her. If I did not marry her, I would expose her and expose my sons to the danger of being tempted of committing fornication. While I was meditating over my dilemma, my faithful Pakistani chauffeur came forward and hit his chest with his right hand and said proudly, I will be her wali and I will give her to you in marriage. The old man stopped his fake narration and looked around. The faces of the audience and the judges gave him boo. No one in the court had applauded what his Pakistani chauffeur supposedly had done. It wasn't because what he had said was something didn't deserve praise, but because they hated Pakistani Muslims. If he had said, my Arab chauffeur said that they would have clapped for 30 minutes. The simple fact of Arab life is that they look down on non-Arab Muslims. They considered themselves as if they were gods on earth, as the Brahmins had their religious position in Hinduism. On the other hand, some Indian Muslims considered themselves Ashrafs or direct descendants of the Prophet Muhammad and looked at other Indian Muslims as Ajlavs and Arzals. The Arzals are like the untouchables Hindus, and they are not allowed to enter the mosques for prayers or permitted to touch the Quran. One of the judges, out of hatred towards the Pakistani Muslims, interrupted the old man and asked him very tricky question. Neither the judge who asked the question nor the old man anticipated the danger of the question. It was a slippery question and changed the course of the trial and created great division between the old Saudi man and his faithful Pakistani chauffeur who allegedly volunteered to be the wali of Ifat Khan. The judge wanted to know why Sheikh Ahmed did not convince his faithful Pakistani chauffeur to marry the Indian small girl and save himself all those troubles which he took to marry her. The foolish old man could easily answer that tricky question by saying that the Sharia would not permit his Pakistani chauffeur to marry Ifat Khan because he had already married her mother Rehana Khan. Nevertheless, he inadvertently incriminated himself by saying that he did harbor that thought and had in fact talked to his Pakistani chauffeur about the possibility of marrying the daughter of his maidservant. However, his chauffeur refused to marry her for some personal reason. The judge wasn't satisfied with the vague answer and demanded to know precisely the personal issue that prevented the chauffeur to marry the small girl. At this point in the trial, the old man had still a chance to escape from the jaws of the tricky question, but he missed the chance again. Instead of referring to the marriage of the mother and his pimp, he said his Pakistani chauffeur informed him that he did not have what other men have. The insistent judge asked Sheikh Ahmed to speak plainly and clearly to the court and tell exactly what his Pakistani chauffeur had told him. The old man's memory lapsed and he forgot that his Pakistani chauffeur was present in court. He said his chauffeur told him that he was castrated when he was in Pakistan and hence he would not marry a woman and deny her what every wife should get from her man. All the 5 judges spoke their minds together as if they were a team of singers. How then did your Pakistani chauffeur marry her mother and sleep with her? Sheikh Ahmed made another fatal error. He took out of his suitcase a medical certificate issued by a Pakistani doctor at Jeddah, which proved that Sabir Ibrahim Shah was a eunuch. When Sabir came to know for the first time that he was a castrated man, the mystery that puzzled him for 3 years was solved. He remembered that on the day he married the beautiful Indian Muslim woman, Rehana Khan, and slept with her in the same room, he tried to have sex with her, but he couldn't. Even Rehana invited him to have sex with her before the old man would come and sleep with her, but he could not do it. She tried everything he asked her to do to stimulate him, but he could not get an erection. He also remembered the same thing happened to him when his secret woman, Mrs. Ahmed, tried to have sex with him after that day and he could not do it with her. He also remembered he trying several times to have sex with the small girl, Ifat Khan, in the absence of his master, but failed. Finally, Sabir concluded that his Allah cursed him and turned him into impotent man because of the evils he did to Rehana Khan and her child. Nevertheless, when the old Saudi man took out of his suitcase a medical report issued by a Pakistani doctor and showed it to the court, Sabir knew who had castrated him. He then understood why the old man trusted him with Rehana and Ifat. Why his wicked master allowed him to sleep with the young beautiful Indian woman in the same bedroom on the day of his secret marriage with her, and why he allowed him to live with his child bride in the same house in his absence. He knew that a Saudi man would not trust his own father and brother with his wife. Sabir Shah was so angry that he could not speak when he stood up. The judge asked him to tell the court what he wanted to say. When he opened his mouth, it was as if a bomb was suddenly dropped inside the court by an angry terrorist of ISIS and he let loose. He said that whatever the old man had said to the court were mere lies. He confessed that Sheikh Ahmed was the one who forced him to marry Rehana Khan on paper because he wanted to sleep with her himself. He was the one who forced him to convince Rehana to sleep with him, which he did. He was the one who spent so much money to bring the beautiful Indian woman from Bombay because he was madly in love with her. He was the one who cheated him and sent him to the Pakistani doctor and got him castrated without his consent and knowledge. Then, the Pakistani man turned to the Sheikh's testimony about the small girl and began to tear it down layer by layer. Sabir narrated to the court the story of Rehana Khan and her daughter from the time they arrived at the Jeddah International Airport until they found them at the Filipino Beautiful Women Salon. He also told the court what happened to Ifat Khan from the day her mother got arrested and falsely accused of having 2 husbands. He admitted that he did not marry her in reality. It was a mere fake marriage, which was done on paper only. He admitted to the court that he was the one who helped Sheikh Ahmed's 2 sons to smuggle a surveillance camera inside their house. He also said that he installed the camera in the women's bathroom. The 2 sons videotaped Rehana Khan while she was taking bath bare naked and used the video to blackmail her and had sex with her. Sabir told the court that he strongly believed the child that the Indian maidservant delivered in jail was the son of one of Sheikh Ahmed's 2 sons. Then, Sabir narrated to the court the sad story of Ifat Khan. He narrated in tears, how the evil Saudi old man had raped her and imprisoned her in Asmara for 3 years. Sabir admitted that he had collaborated with the evil old man in all the evils that he had done to his Indian child bride. He said that he had acted as a wali for Ifat and signed the marriage contract. He said the old man began to rape Ifat when she was 8 years old. He brutally raped her until she bled and rushed to the hospital. He also informed the court that for 3 years he lived in the house of Sheikh Ahmed at Asmara and kept the small Indian Muslim girl imprisoned with the 4 corners of his house. His confession made the 7 members of the CIA team to shed tears. With his admission as an accessory to the crimes of Sheikh Ahmed, the audience began to get angry with him, but none of them had shed a single tear for Rehana and her daughter, nor had his testimony touched the hearts of the judges.